All right, first things first, there's two really cool things I want to share with you. Number one, we've been waiting on this for a while, but we finally were able to launch the Tolman Performance brand officially. The website is now up and running. Head on over there to check it out, tolmanperformance.com. We got all kinds of cool stuff on there. We got a couple different designs of t-shirts. Number one, we've got the ugly truck design, which is the one that I'm wearing right now. And this is really one of my major favorites because the ugly truck is really the vehicle that I was able to kick this channel off with. And it's just been such a fun project. And the second shirt, which I really like, is the Tolman family crest. And we had it modified a little bit for a shirt, and I really like how that one looks as well. So head on over to tolmanperformance.com and check it out. My wife's been working really, really hard on this. I love how it looks. And buy a shirt or two, because honestly, the more shirts that you guys buy, the more car parts I get to buy and make more cool content with them. So, like I said, head on over to tolmanperformance.com. Second cool piece of news that I wanted to share is I actually did buy another vehicle, and it wasn't supposed to be a project vehicle for the channel, but it's just too cool of an opportunity to pass by. So I'll show you the new vehicle next time. I'm not going to give it away just yet, but I have a challenge for you guys. I have the key over here on the workbench, and I want to see if you can tell me what kind of vehicle it is just by looking at the key. It looks like that. I'm obviously not going to show you the other side because that would be a dead giveaway, but if it'll focus, the teeth kind of look like that. It's a black key, and it has some buttons on the other side that do things like open doors and trunks and, well, shoot, I shouldn't have said trunk, but you probably do know me as a truck guy because I used to work on a truck show, and I do love pickup trucks. That's mainly what I build, but see if you can guess what kind of vehicle it is just based off of that key. Drop a comment down below, and in the next upload, I will show you exactly what it is and do kind of a full unveil. And I've already got some really cool things planned for it. Like I said, it wasn't supposed to be a project vehicle, and I'll explain all that in the future, but basically just as soon as I see a car and it kind of gets stuck in the back of my mind, well, the wheels start turning, and you guys know what happens. It's just, the plans just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So next time I'll show it to you, and have patience, we'll get there. So today's project, before we get to the fun stuff, we actually got to finish up the first job that we're doing here at Tolman Performance, the shop. That's the exhaust build on the 93 F-150. In the previous episode, I showed you guys what it takes to start an exhaust build like this, and last time I had the front section of the exhaust basically just tacked together, but since then I've finish welded everything and it's 100% complete all the way back to the flange behind the converter. Now, one thing I didn't show you, I added a couple of extra O2 bungs, one over here on the driver's side, and this is because we have a couple of extra upgrades planned in the future for adding performance, and the wideband is probably going to need to be installed. So I just figured I'd add the bungs since we have the whole system out and it takes basically zero extra effort. And the stock O2 sensor for now is just going to go over there on the passenger side. The Y pipe in the middle, that's made by Flowmaster, and from what I've read, it's one of the better flowing Y pipes you can get. Like I said, 2.5 inch in, single 3 inch out. We've got a catalytic converter back there, should be 50 state legal. We've got ourselves a stainless steel hanger that's going to go right next to a factory location, and then on the very back we've got ourselves a V-band flange. Now you'll notice I let the pipe pass through and let just a tiny bit stick out beyond the end, and the reason I did that is because it makes it a whole lot easier to line up the two halves of the system underneath the truck when you're putting it together, and it makes it just a little bit less likely to leak. You do have to leave just enough room to slip the back part of the exhaust in so you can actually weld it to the V-band, but like I said, just basically for alignment purposes, it's so much easier to get the two halves together. So now I've got to get this whole system back up underneath the truck, and then my next major goal is basically I've got to hang the muffler, and then it's just a matter of connecting the dots between that flange and the muffler, and then finally between the muffler and the tailpipe. Okay, quick status update. We've got the front half of the exhaust 100% complete. It's bolted in. I started it up. I did a leak check to make sure the flanges up front weren't going to leak, because sometimes you got to shimmy those around, you know, tighten them up just a little bit extra on the front. The O2 sensors are in, the rear hanger on the front section is in, and I also installed the muffler. So now it's just a matter of connecting the dots between the V-band on the back of the Cat to the muffler, and then finally build the tailpipe with one more hanger on it, and we're done. Now, when I hung the muffler, Black Widow actually recommends that you install a hanger directly onto the body of the muffler rather than on the tailpipe. They said it'll support it a little bit better. So that's exactly what I did. I put two hangers on the back side of the muffler, and I actually welded it to the seam that they welded the muffler together on the outside. I kind of figured that would be the strongest point. And then two hangers rather in the factory location will prevent any sort of twisting, you know, just as the truck vibrates and drives and shakes around when we're going off-road. Sometimes if you just install one hanger that's offset on a muffler, you know, the gravity will kind of make the muffler want to twist a little bit as it droops down. But anyway, two hangers prevents that. So like I said, time to connect the dots. The flange on the V-band on the back of the Cat is offset by about 1.5 inches or so, I thought. I'll get to that in just a second, from the inlet of the muffler, which means I got to make a jog over piece, or a dog leg you might call it. And they're pretty simple to build using mandrel bent tubing. So I started out with a 45-degree bend just like this. And I cut it, so on the straight leg, I basically cut it as close as possible to the spot where the bend starts. On a side note also, the builder's kit I got came with these flared connections so you can kind of slip one end inside the other. I've actually been cutting all those off because I hate how they look. I just prefer to butt weld them, because to me this just kind of looks sloppy if you leave these in without actually needing a slip connection. But anyway, the jog pipe. You cut as close as possible to the start of the bend on the straight leg here, and this is kind of what you're left with when you're done. And then all you've really got to do is come and slide these guys together, if I can do this with one hand, slide them together and weld it up. Now, by cutting on the straightest part, or the end of the straight part rather, the hole that you're left with on the end of the pipe is perfectly round, and that means you can clock this 360 degrees and it'll still line up perfectly. And then all you got to do, like I said, is weld it together. Now, I did actually mess up on my measurements. I originally thought I only needed to jog over by about 1.5 inches, and that's kind of what I did here. You can see that 1.5 inch difference. But I actually slid this up underneath the truck, and I need to extend it a little bit. But that's not a big deal, because to get a greater offset, well, all you've got to do is shorten one of these legs, slide it down, and then the measurement that I took, I actually only need to add about a 3-inch straight section in between the two. So that's simple. All I'll do is cut 3 inches off, not a bend, but I'll cut 3 inches off a straight piece of pipe, and then just tack weld it on here, tack weld it on there, and that'll be my jog over. And like I said, shorten that piece a little bit. So we'll continue on progress, and in just a few moments, hopefully, you guys will get to hear this truck start up. I've got the middle pipe complete that goes from the V-band all the way into the muffler. There's just one thing I wanted to point out. Whenever you guys are working with V-band flanges, to make sure that they stay perfectly flat or as close to flat as possible, because whenever you're welding something that's made from metal, especially stainless steel, the heat is going to want to make it distort and potentially warp a little bit. So I always keep an extra V-band just in the toolbox. That way I can clamp it together as an assembly while I'm welding it. Because I mean, when you're coming along here with a torch, there's a lot of heat that's being put into this flange. Now I do skip around, I go from side to side, I kind of work in thirds, but even so, there is a lot of heat that's going into that one stainless flange. So by having an extra backup flange on there, just kind of clamped together, number one, it acts as a heat sink, so it pulls some of the heat away from the first flange that you're welding. And number two, it just helps prevent it from warping. So just remember that, and that also applies to things like, you know, a T4, T6 turbo flange, you know, a cylinder head flange if you're building a set of headers. Just find something to clamp it to bolt it to, just to make sure it stays flat. That way it minimizes any chances of warping.
All right, so the tailpipe is 100% mocked up, and now I'm ready to finish weld it together. But first, I just wanted to go over some of the welder settings that I use, just because every now and then you guys ask about that. So first of all, this machine is capable of doing the pulse feature, which is basically where the main current is fluctuated up and down automatically. You can set, you know, your main high current, and then you can set the low current that it drops down to. And that does a couple different things. Number one, it gives you a nice steady rhythm that you can kind of use to control when you add the filler. And then it also just helps limit heat input, which is fairly important on a thinner stainless steel material like this. But I know a lot of guys do use the pulse feature, but I've just never got accustomed to it, to be honest. I just found that I get the best results just using straight current, use my foot to control how much amperage is put into the material, and then to help limit heat, I also will count the dabs. I'll do like 12 or 14 dabs in a row, and then I'll stop and I'll let the post flow run. And post flow is basically just where the gas continues to flow to shield that molten metal after you've stopped welding. So setup, here's what we've got. My main current, I usually come down here for this material about 65 amps. The rule of thumb is about 1 amp per thousandths of thickness. And then this is my post flow here. I set this up to about 5.5 to 6 seconds. That way I get a nice, you know, even gas coverage while the metal is still hot. And then pre-flow, that's just set to default on a half a second. I don't know if you really need pre-flow or not, but that just at least shields the area with argon before you start to weld. So like I said, that's a pretty simple setup. I don't use the pulse feature. I probably should experiment with it a little bit more, but Also, you can, just because you set the machine at say 65 amps, that doesn't mean you're using 65 amps all the time. If you're used to MIG welding, it's kind of different than TIG welding, because with TIG welding, you've got the foot pedal, and that's basically just a throttle. I mean, the more you mash the throttle down, the more power you get. So if you set your machine at 65 amps, the only time you get 65 amps of output is when you're floorboarded. You got that pedal all the way down. And you know, it'll be anywhere in between 0 and 65 amps, just depending on where you put your foot. So that's the way I set this welder up. In terms of the torch that I'm using, this is just a number 17 flex head torch. I run a number 12 monster cup on there. This is, I believe, Arc Zone hybrid tungsten. And then as far as gas, I run this thing about 25 CFH on the argon, which you kind of need to have a little bit more gas flow when you're running a lens like that. But anyway, that'll give you a lot better argon coverage with a weld compared to just like your traditional nozzle that comes with most standard TIG torches. But anyway, that's the setup I use. So now it's time to start welding. All right, if you remember when we started this project, one of our goals was to make sure we had a lot more ground clearance than we did with the original system. And I was able to get the entire exhaust system pretty much tucked up above the frame level. So I believe that we met that goal. We also wanted to have something that would sound better, perform better, and obviously just look a whole lot better than that old rusty pile of scrap that we cut out of the truck. And I believe we met all the goals that we set out. So the only thing we have left to do now is get this thing outside and hear how it's gonna sound. Now, you guys know what to do on this video. Like it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And also, if you guys need any work done to your project, whether that be a custom exhaust, maybe you've got an 8.1, you'd like to turbocharge it and see if you can make more horsepower than the 8.1 that I did. Or maybe you need an engine swap, wiring, whatever it is, let me know. My email is tolmanperformance@gmail.com. We'll see if we can't get your project out here to Utah and maybe feature it on the channel. So thank you guys so much for watching. Just sit back and enjoy the sound of this 351 with a Venom 250 and a catalytic converter. So there's kind of a wide open throttle clip. I really like the tone of it, and like I said, from the inside it's definitely not too loud under full throttle. But then when you're at cruising speed like here, about 2,000 RPM, this thing's cruising at about 50 miles an hour. I mean, you can hardly tell it has a different exhaust on it. So the cruising RPM, definitely nice and comfortable.